Well, hello, folks. I'm going to be walking you through some notes this morning, and they're going to be pre-recorded instead of live. With these notes, you have a set of notes that you will be working your way through yourselves, and that set of notes, with the guided notes, you'll find on Canvas. Okay, so let me show you real quick where you would go for that. In Canvas, of course, you open up to the module screen. This is where all the lessons and assignments are kept. We are in the scientific method or scientific investigations and measurements section, and you are watching the lecture on experimental design under Unit 1, Part 2. The guided notes for experimental design are in that same section right underneath there. So you just click on that, and as I work through the notes, you'll fill in the blanks that I'm filling in by hand. You'll type them in. All right. So what we're talking about today is the scientific method. You've seen a video on it. You've done a short lesson on it. Now we're going to kind of dig a little deeper with it. And as we dig a little deeper with it, we're going to not just look at the scientific method itself, but how we would use it to set up an experiment. Okay, so we're going to kind of do a little thought experiment as we go. With this thought experiment, I'm going to make it up, and I'm going to define the different pieces of it and how we would set that up as we work our way through. Okay, so what is the scientific method? Well, the scientific method simply is just it's a strategy. Okay, it's a strategy or a solution. I'm a little thick there, so let me, it's going to be harder for you to read if I don't thin out my line a little bit. And let's go with a different color. All right, so it's a strategy. So you hopefully had started already typing that, or a process. Okay, either one of those would work there as an answer to that blank. It's a recipe, if you will. Okay, you can think of it in terms of a recipe. And why do we use it? Well, we use it to find answers to questions. Now, these questions can be global, like how do we solve climate change, or they can be very personal. Okay, like how do you choose your next cell phone? But it's a process that's logical. That's the key. Okay, it's logical. It takes out emotion and just leaves us working then with just a logical process for coming up with these answers. We don't make an emotional decision. We don't let somebody sway our opinion. Okay, science doesn't care about belief or opinion. Science cares about facts. All right, so when it comes to the scientific method, you're basing these answers on a very calculated, very controlled, very step-by-step approach. Is there only one scientific method? No. So we kind of try to use general terms when we talk about the steps of the scientific method. There are several versions, but they all begin with something that you're wondering about, or a question, or that you're trying to solve. Okay, and you're wondering about something. It's something that needs to be answered. And it provides an organized, logical method for conducting and analyzing an experiment. And the key to analyzing and working on that experiment is within that experiment itself, you want to set it up and analyze it in such a way that only you're testing one thing at a time. Okay. And all other factors, all of the things that could affect the outcome of looking at that one thing at a time, that's what you're trying to get rid of in an experiment. You're trying to make everything consistent enough that you're only testing one thing at a time. Now, during the process of a scientific method, as you saw in the video earlier, is that there's going to be eventually some kind of a hypothesis. And in a hypothesis, it's an educated guess. Okay, so you can see I've got two lines there. Educated guess. You don't have to worry about having two blanks. You just put an educated guess into the one blank, or a prediction. Okay, but it's an important step Because at this point, as you saw in the video, you've done some research, you've learned about it, you've tested to see if you've looked out on the internet to see if anybody else has answered this question already for you. Okay, so you don't need to reinvent the wheel. If somebody already has answered that question, then you just come up with a different question. All right, but it's an educated guess. It's just a prediction of what you think is going to happen based on observations and your knowledge that you've gained through the research. All right. Another thing that's going to be important in a scientific method, and especially in the experiment, is you're going to gather data. Okay, and data is just information. Very important to have this information. All right, very important to make observations and measurements. Observations is a type of data that doesn't involve a number necessarily. Okay, like the color or the consistency or some kind of physical property, possibly. All right, and then there's also measurements involved, and those measurements do involve some kind of number. And within those measurements, you're talking about giving it some kind of dimension, okay? Like it's so many inches tall or it's so many seconds, okay? So there's some kind of a measurement, but there's going to be numbers involved with this one. And units and so on. Now, during the scientific method, and we're going to kind of work through it pretty quickly, I think, of the steps of the scientific method. But in the scientific method, as we mentioned above there, the whole purpose of it is to answer a question. So you've got to ask a question. Now, again, this question can be global. Okay, so you're going to try to solve world hunger. All right. Well, needs to be a logical approach to that. Or it can be just as simple as solving a math problem. Okay, even solving a math problem works through these same steps. So you've got to have some kind of a question. What do you want to know? What do you want to explain? Use observations you have made to write a question that addresses a problem or topic you want to investigate. And then, like the video said, you want to do some research. This is an important step, okay? Because maybe to solve world hunger, for example, you need to know what's already out there. All right, so maybe you can plug into something like that, or what kind of research is being done already with it, what kind of problems there are with world hunger, okay, and so on. So you're doing some research. If it's a math problem, your research would be maybe looking through the class notes, looking through the textbook. You're trying to find some answers or some knowledge about the question, okay, so that you can set up a better experiment. Once you've done your research, you want to then make a prediction, okay, based on what I've just learned, based on my understanding. I want to predict that this is what's going to happen during this experiment. So based on your research and your observations, what do you think will happen? Predict the answer to your question or the outcome of the experiment. So you need a hypothesis. So here's the thought experiment that we're going to walk through as we work through these steps. Okay. The thought experiment is, let's say I'm trying to come up with a science fair project and I'm not having any luck, but I noticed that my parents have just bought some tomato plants. All right, so I've got several tomato plants and I'm going to need 4 for my experiment. So here's my tomato plants. I know they're lovely, aren't they? They're all about the same size. They're all in the same size pot. They're all the same age. Okay, so there's some good things about having these tomato plants. And what I want to do is I want to answer the question, what soda pop makes a tomato plant grow better? All right, so let's say I go into my refrigerator and I see what we've got, and we got some Coca-Cola. All right, or it could be Pepsi, okay, but I just picked Coke. We've also got some Mountain Dew. And we've got some Sprite. So one of these plants, we're going to feed Coke One of these plants we're going to feed Mountain Dew. One of these plants we're going to feed Sprite. And then the last plant, last but not least here, we're going to just feed water because that's normal. You want to see if any of these actually do harm as opposed to making it grow better. Okay, there's no point in coming up with a solution or a result of this experiment if all four of these pops or all three of these pops actually kill the plant. So we want to prove that one of these actually works better than water. So we got Coke, Mountain Dew, Sprite. Okay, so the question is, which of these will actually help a plant grow? So I might go out on the internet and say, what happens when you feed a plant pop, soda pop? All right, and I might read about it, and I might, and then I might type in, because all of these contain sugar, what happens to a plant when you feed a plant sugar water? All right, so I'll read about that. I'll make an understanding and get a good sense of what that means. And then I eventually, if I'm going to really do this experiment, if somebody hasn't already done it before, and don't go ahead and Google it because I don't know if they have or not, but we're going to assume that they haven't. So what we're going to do then is we're going to determine a hypothesis. And the hypothesis is going to be, I don't know what just happened there. I think I flicked something with my pen, but the hypothesis is going to say, let's say Mountain Dew, because Mountain Dew does everything better, right? So let's say Mountain Dew helps a plant grow better. It makes a plant grow taller and more lush. Okay, so Mountain Dew is going to be key to our experiment. We need to make a prediction, okay? So that way we can test the hypothesis or not. So the prediction here is that Mountain Dew, of these four liquids, Mountain Dew is going to make the plant grow better. All right, so now that we've come up with our hypothesis, that's what we build the experiment around. Okay, so we want to create and do an experiment. And that experiment is going to be, the whole purpose of it is to test the hypothesis. Now, we don't want to make the experiment skewed to make sure that Mountain Dew wins. Okay, we want to make sure that we do this fair. All right, so we develop a procedure for a reliable experiment. We address safety rules, if there are any. We follow the steps in our procedure to perform the experiment, record the data, and make observations. Okay, so the data, we would have to decide how we're going to test which plant is growing better. Probably height. We'd have to describe how we're going to, in our procedure, we're going to have to describe how we measure that height. And what we're going to do with this part is we're going to, on the back of this sheet, or in the bottom half of your notes, your guided notes, we're going to spend time talking about what a good procedure looks like and what a good experiment, how you set it up, because this is going to involve all the variables, and we're going to look at definitions of those later and talk about those in terms of our plants. Okay, so we're going to look at our variables. We're going to talk about the type of data, how we're going to measure that data, and so on. All right, so you got to create and do an experiment. And this is a big section right here. All right, this is major. Once you've created and done your experiment, you want to be, as you're doing that, you want to be gathering data. You want to document your results. Okay, you want to do that in some way that's measurable. I should say data, D-A-T-A. It looked like it said datia. I kind of get sloppy sometimes when I write, as most of you all probably do as well. So we want to gather data. We want to collect measurements, and we want to collect observations. Let's say we're watching our plants grow over a couple of weeks, our tomato plants. And as we watch the tomato plants grow, we start to see that one of them is growing taller, and one of them is starting to get a little yellowy and starting to look like it's dying. Okay. Well, the taller we want to record. So that's a measurement. And we want to do that in inches or feet or whatever we're measuring in. And that it's one of them starting to get yellow and drying out. Okay. That's qualitative data or observation. So we want to make sure that we're doing both. All right. So we're gathering our data. Once we get our data and we're perform the experiment, we want to next analyze that data. Now, there's lots of leeway in how you analyze the data. You want to organize it. You want to probably graph it. Okay. Is the data reliable? Does your data and observations from the experiment support your hypothesis? So we're analyzing the data. We're trying to see what the data is telling us. Here you might do a graph. You'll certainly probably, if you're gathering measurement data, you'll want to do a data table. Okay, so you're gathering data, you're analyzing data, and now you're going to begin to build a conclusion. You're going to see what the results tell you. If the data is reliable, you move on to the conclusion. If it's not, if it's inaccurate, if you figure out something about your experiment that's flawed, then you'll then you'll modify the experiment and start it over. Okay, rewrite your procedure, trying to address those flaws. Like, for example, if we were giving different amounts of pop to our plants, then that's going to disrupt it. Okay, we don't want to give 20 or a cup, let's say, of Mountain Dew while we're only given a half a cup of each of the other ones, or 2 cups of each of the other ones. All right, so we want to make sure that we're consistent with how we're treating each of these plants. And if we're inconsistent, if we realize, oh crap, we're inconsistent here, then we want to modify it and redo. Okay, something's flawed, and if we realize that something's flawed, then we want to go back and fix it. All right, now the conclusion, it's the last thing that happens. Once we've got our data and once we're happy with our data, we need to tell somebody. Okay, we need to write it down in such a way that somebody can come along and read that and say, oh, that's what happens. Okay, so this is kind of like an Amazon review, if you will. You're trying to review and reflect upon the experiment itself, and say what you learned from the experiment. And we're going to work through a type of conclusion called a rerun conclusion that helps us to analyze an experiment. It's kind of a step-by-step approach. Instead of me just giving you general information about what I want, this helps you kind of narrow down exactly what I'm looking for. So this is a kind of a recipe for writing a good conclusion. So you want to write a conclusion that summarizes your results, and it even mentions rerun conclusion there. And this is whether it's good or bad. Okay, if your good results are that everything but the water killed the plant, then we want to know that, right? We don't want to be feeding our tomato plants different kinds of soda while they're growing. But if we find out that Mountain Dew plants grow twice as fast and their tomatoes come out tasting like Mountain Dew, that might be something that's good, right? We want to be able to express that and share that information so that other people will have tomatoes that taste like Mountain Dew if they want those. All right, so this is an important step. It may not work. The experiment may have been messed up. Not that it was flawed in any way. It just we may realize that it's not good to feed soda to your plants, any kind of soda. All right, and that it really is, in fact, best to feed it water. So that's the kind of thing we're going to learn there. All right, so I'm going to stop there with this part of the lecture, and then when you're done processing this part of the lecture and you're done with the guided notes, if you have to back up and go look at another part to get some blanks that you might have missed, okay, that's fine. Feel free to do that. But we're going to stop with this part, and then part 2 will be about designing an effective experiment. Okay, so looking back at this part right here specifically that I starred, looking back at that section and how we do that. All right.